it's an absolute pleasure for me to introduce Kasso, Okoudjou, and Francis Su. So as you all know, you were participating in reading, many of you were participating in reading groups yesterday. They were the co-chairs of the task force on undoing, sorry, I got the name in my browser here so I wouldn't get it wrong. The task force on understanding and documenting the historical role of the AMS in racial discrimination. This was a task force formed by the AMS on the day of the strike for Black Lives, June 10th of last year. The AMS then issued a statement and put together a task force which produced this really moving report towards a fully inclusive mathematics profession, which has just recently been fully publicly released. And we're just delighted that Francis and Kasso have agreed to come talk to us about this important work. So for those of you who haven't met them, Kasso Okoudjou is a professor of mathematics at Tufts University, and Francis Su is the, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the Benedictson Karwa Professor of Mathematics at Harvey Mudd College and past president of the MAA. And I enjoy every minute I get to spend with them, and I'm just delighted that they were able to join us today. So Kasso, Francis.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thanks all the organizers for inviting us and for letting us talk about the task force report. I'm going to share my screen with you just in a moment. One more minute, sorry. All right, I think we're ready to share my screen. That's not what I meant to do.
I think maybe pressing the share button or the present. Ah, yes, there we go.
All right, so thanks again, everyone, for, first of all, for the organizer for inviting us and for everyone to join. Francis and I would like to briefly present the report. We're not going to talk much about the content of the report. We're going to share some personal reflection on the report, and we're going to open up the meeting for a more conversation, expecting people to ask questions, and then we'll try to respond. So to begin, I would like to just remind everyone the role that we were given when we were asked to work on this initiative. Jill Pfeiffer, the president of the AMS at the time, asked us to first of all document and try to understand the role of discrimination in mathematics, and to consider a recommendation that could be made to address this issue. And we were to gather information, to write a report, and to sort of use any other resource that we could get from the AMS to sort of do the work that we were tasked. And to do that, the team was composed of 7 members: Tasha Innis from Spelman College, Jim Lewis from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Irina Mitrea from Temple University, Adriana Serrano from Bates College, and Dylan Thurston from the University of Indiana, Bloomington. And I'll share with you a picture that we took because this is how we did our work on Zoom mostly. And these are the people who helped write the report. We got a lot of help from the AMS. Abby Herzog was quite instrumental in helping us access many of the resources. And Andrea Williams from the DC office of the AMS was also very instrumental in helping us. In addition, we were able to talk with Michael Barani, who served as a consultant, giving us some historical perspective on some of the issue that we were looking at. In addition, we'd like to thank like the MS staff in general for the dedication, for the help. Whenever we were looking for any document, despite the fact that we were like under like state like rule for the pandemic, they were able most of the time to give us like what we need in a very short period of time. So it was quite like a big effort that they put on themselves to make sure that the work was done correctly. So from here, I'm going to let Francis sort of take over and run us through some of the things that we work on. Francis?
Yeah, so I'll say a little bit about methodology. So we began meeting in July and met nearly weekly, and maybe more than weekly often, to do this work. We decided that we would focus on the policies, practices, and actions by the AMS. And so in some sense, focusing on structural issues as our primary focus. We are more concerned with the impact than the intent behind various actions by the AMS. So it was important for us to think about the impact that AMS actions has had on various members of our community. We interviewed a large number of mathematicians, mostly mathematicians of color, but also AMS staff and also some historians. We kept extensive notes from these meetings, and every interview was attended by at least 2 members of the task force. We reviewed a number of AMS records, AMS primarily council minutes and committee minutes. Historical records were available, but not that these were not easy to gather during the pandemic. So we also relied on staff sometimes to dig up things for us in boxes and rooms. And we also sent out questionnaires to various communities and also gathered responses from the website. One of the things that we leaned on heavily was the AMS Mission Statement, what the American Mathematical Society is about. And as many of you know, it's certainly prioritizes mathematical research and scholarship. But you'll notice that there are sort of 5 bullet points, ways in which it serves the community. And so among them, you'll notice the 4th bullet point is furthering the interest of research and scholarship happens through advancing the status of the profession of mathematics, encouraging and facilitating full participation of all individuals. And so if you read the report, we leaned heavily into that statement as part of the mission statement of things that we should be about as a society. Next slide. So if you had a chance to glimpse at the report, you'll notice that we have some findings and recommendations. And we put the findings and recommendations up front very early in chapter 1. And if there's any part of the document that you should read, it's the preface and chapter 1. And you'll get a good sense of the scope of the work that we conducted. And there were several findings, 7 findings that we organized our findings into. And every chapter after chapter 1 is basically focused on documenting those findings. And so you'll see, for instance, a chapter early on understanding whether people in the society believe racism is a concern. The second one is focusing sort of historically moving from the early 1900s, where blatant discrimination often at meetings occurred, but then moving more recently into the next chapter deals with missed opportunities, places where AMS had a chance to take some action to help improve the climate for our colleagues and didn't. And then the next chapters sort of document many of the experiences of our colleagues, our Black colleagues, in ways that are happening even ongoing now. The next chapter is about as a result, the fact that we have many of our colleagues not trusting the society. And then we had a chapter about HBCUs and their important influence. And this is probably something that I think, especially if you're involved in graduate admissions, you should definitely pay attention to. And then the last chapter is about AMS actions, ways in which AMS has sort of moved the needle in advancing the important work of diversifying our profession, but also some ways in which we should continue to move the needle forward. So those are the findings. I guess one thing that we should say maybe early on is that we focused mainly on the experiences of Black mathematicians, and that was partly because the president, Jill Pfeiffer, asked us to focus on our Black colleagues, but also because we did feel that focusing in on the experiences of Black mathematicians could inform the experiences of other minoritized groups in mathematics, but it was helpful to have that focus. I'll now pass it back to Kasso to say a little bit about recommendations.
So thanks, Francis. So in terms of recommendation, we broke them down into 3 different categories. Things that are related to the governance of the society, things that are related to programs done by the performed by the AMS, and the last part is an accountability mechanism that should ensure that the recommendation that we are putting forward are actually sort of executed in one way or the other, or at least the AMS should report and tell us, like on a periodic basis, whether or not some of these things have been taken care of. One of the reasons for doing this was that in the process of our work this past summer, we came across a report of a task force that was similar to ours, that was created in 1996, and that dealt with issue related to the one that we were dealing with. And some of the recommendations of this task force were things that we were actually thinking about as proposing. In fact, some of them are actually duplicate that we put down here. And we felt like the MS should have a way to actually update like the community on the progress being made. Now, having said this, I think the recommendation here is for the MS, but I want to draw our attention that the MS is at the end of the day is made of people, it's made of us. And this recommendation, even though it's for the entire organization, should sort of be thought of maybe as broad guideline to department to think about like problem that they had dealing with very low number or absence of diversity in the graduate program, and see whether or not they can also perform like some sort of questioning of the way they've been sort of conducting like their program, and see whether or not there are things that they can learn in order to sort of adapt some of these reports or some of these recommendations to their program. So even though this is for the society, I want to sort of make sure that we also sort of think about it as something that we should also look at individually and in our department to see whether or not there are things that we might be able to learn and to try to change within our own department. It will be clear that changing things in our own department will have a big reflection in the entire society. Because the AMS at the end of the day is a reflection of its members. And so if we do better at trying to sort of have a more inclusive graduate study, or even like a more inclusive department, this will also manifest directly into the whole profession. So I think I would like to maybe ask Francis to start by sharing some of his reflection. And then I'll sort of pick up on mine, and then we're going to open up for questions. So Francis.
Yeah, so I think maybe the first thing that I would say, just reflecting personally on the experience of this task force, is that it was emotional work. I think for all of us. I think even if you feel like you're aware of the kinds of experiences that others have had, you're really not aware until you actually sit and listen to people share some of the hard stories. And it really took emotional energy for our interviewees to spend time with us, and we recognize that. And that's perhaps even traumatic for some of them. It was emotional work to actually dig through records and realize, when you're looking through historical records, you have to think a little bit about what evidence you have and what evidence you don't have, and the reasons that you don't have that evidence. And so this is where it was helpful to have some of the work of Michael Barney, who'd actually dug through the AMS archives and provided information, which you'll see in the report in some of the earlier chapters, that I think were really helpful for us to understand, like, okay, well, there's a letter here in this file, and why is the letter here? Well, it's here because somebody felt it was important enough to be here, right? And so you think a little bit about why the secretary was keeping certain records about discrimination. There's a folder called discrimination, and understanding that. And so in terms of the emotional impact that it had on us, I think you see that in the report. I mean, we felt it was strongly that it was important to start with a story, and so that's why we started with the example of William Claytor. There are many stories that we didn't tell, and there wasn't space to tell, but we did feel that starting with an example would be important. And then some in later the chapters, you'll read many of the experiences of our current colleagues in the profession, and those I think everybody should take some time for the time that our interviewees spent with us. I think it's really honoring their time if you take time to read those chapters closely. Another thing that I was surprised by, maybe, and this is a hopeful surprise, is that a majority of AMS leadership views racism as a problem that AMS should address. And so we have some statistics in the chapter, in one of the early chapters to back that up. But what that means is, and the reason I'm hopeful is that I served on the council maybe 15 years ago, and I'm not sure that council would necessarily have agreed that racism is a problem in the profession. And now I think there's actually some hope that the needle can be moved because of the strong numbers of people in current leadership. I'm talking about the council and the board of trustees who believe that this is something we should look at. And one of the things that might be helpful for you all, I know that sometimes people say, this kind of work is political work, and mathematicians shouldn't be involved in politics. Well, we have a whole list of examples where AMS actually took actions on matters that many people would deem political, getting involved in various things related. Well, there's a whole list of examples there that might be useful to you if you want to back up the fact that mathematicians actually have considered political issues because they impact our members. And that's the way that I think we should all be thinking about diversity is in diversifying our profession, is that regardless of what you think about politics or not politics, improving the climate for our colleagues should be an important priority for all of us. One thing that was just amazing to me in terms of understanding the impact of HBCUs on our profession, positive impact, is that nearly half of all Black math majors in the US come through HBCUs. And the reason that should be amazing is that the HBCUs account for just 3% of all institutions in the US. And so what this, I think, if you think about the statistics, it not only says something great about what's going on in HBCUs, it says something about what so many of our other institutions are failing to do. And so that, I think, gave me a lot of pause and reflection to think about that. And then the last thing I'll say about just personally is that there are many instances where AMS failed to act. And, this is, in terms of focusing on racist structures rather than racist individuals, I think this is something that we all need to reflect on, is ways in which things that we fail to do now, because, maybe we're just a little cautious about changing things up, and, maybe there's some potentially, reasonable reasons for, like, waiting to act. Well, if you look back, 25 years from now, will you think will you have been sad that you missed an opportunity to act? I think the chapter on missed opportunities really highlights that. If you take a look, I'm sure there are plenty of people who felt like at the time, like, okay, let's pause. Now we don't need to do a study on minority participation, or, maybe they felt like, oh no, I don't want to shake things up right now. One of the most appalling things that I think you'll see in some of these chapters was how to sort of avoid non-discrimination, being accused of discrimination. Meetings would basically just not hold social events, and then hold informal ones behind the scenes that Black colleagues weren't welcome at. And so, there's sort of an example where you're like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe that's even a more blatant example than an opportunity that was missed. But this is one of the things I think the big takeaways for all of us is to think through, what are you going to be sad about 25 years from now when you look back on your programs? Passing it back to you, Kasso.
Thank you, Francis. So for me, I would like to start from the AMS mission statement. And I feel like even up to now, there is a tension within the AMS. People feel like the AMS is not like, I'm repeating what we've heard, that people will sort of try to make a difference between the AMS, the MAA. We're not the MAA. And the reason being like the AMS is being viewed more as research, purely like a full research prism, not considering all the other 5 points that Francis mentioned about like the mission statement of the MS. So I'm just trying to sort of put here like the mission statement of the MS as it was in 1923. And it was expanded later on as a result of 1991 strategic planning of the MS to include all the 5 bullet points that Francis mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And we have not, I feel like we have not agreed as a society that, or not everyone sort of think that those 5 points are still sort of important, and sort of will not consider, for instance, a mathematician as someone who has probably just maybe published just 1 paper after their thesis, or somebody who is teaching like a lot of courses and who is sending like many students to different graduate programs, even not in mathematics. Somebody who got a degree in mathematics and is working in government or in industry. Are all those people mathematicians? I think the answer should be yes. And the MS should sort of make sure that the 5 different points that the mission statement stress out are actually really valued, and value not just like in word, but value in terms of what kind of value we put in rewarding people doing each of this work. And that's something that I sort of felt like the core of the mission statement has sort of been sort of weighted a little bit toward like research at the exclusion of everything else for many decades. It's been changing, and I hope that this continues. In fact, like the MS itself, like periodically, and there are instances in the report where you'll see like the MS or people inside the profession sort of think like quite like far ahead. And in 1999, for instance, there was a report of the MS, and it's the title is right there on the slide. That sort of says that the success of the mathematics department depends essentially on making sure that underrepresented population is actually brought into this, to the profession. And so the MS has been sort of putting like diversity, inclusion, and more inclusivity from various underrepresented group for many years. And I think we should probably try to settle that debate and actually work toward making this happen really. So the other thing that I sort of felt at a personal level is the role of the graduate program. So if you look at the MS as being like made up of us, of people who make decisions, then the problem that the MS is confronted are also problems probably that each department is being sort of dealing with. And it's important to sort of think what we can do at a local level is not just about the MS, but Why is it that, as the report sort of made clear, that today, if you look at the number of speakers at various AMS meetings and you count, there have been like only about 12 or 15 Black mathematicians who have spoken at the AMS meeting since like I think we counted up to 1970 or 1960. And this is not like, this is not on the AMS alone. I mean, how many of these people have spoken at like various conference in your own department, at various meetings in many sort of local setting? If they don't get a chance to sort of speak at like a department colloquium, department talk, there is no way they can get a chance to sort of speak at like a big meeting as the MS. So there are things that you can sort of say that the MS is not doing, but those things are actually a reflection of what we are doing ourselves. And that's something that we need to sort of keep in mind. Thinking about like a graduate student organizing like a local graduate seminar, they could sort of make sure that to include this to sort of neighboring school that could sort of attract many more people. So those are few things that I felt like even though there are problems within the MS, there are also problems for the profession at large. And then that led me to sort of pick exactly the same over statistic that Francis just mentioned, the fact that the HBCUs essentially between 2001 and 2009 graduated essentially almost half of the undergraduate student in mathematics. And so it's important that we learn what they've done, that we sort of not try to reinvent with the wheel, that we make sure that we acknowledge that we're not doing anything new here. People have sort of been working to make sure that despite all the barriers, that like mathematics is still inclusive. And so we need to sort of not start from scratch, but make sure that we sort of go and learn from those people and see what they're doing well. I'm very happy. Justin shared with us at the beginning of the list that Emily made available for programs that decide not to use the GRE. This is a good initiative. Some schools have been doing this for some time. We should learn, how is this going? Let's not just sort of worry about admission. And I'm very, very happy of the fact that there is a follow-ups trying to sort of get to the qualifying exam, because the problem is not just sort of admitting students. The problem is making sure that we create the condition for people to succeed. We create the condition for people to sort of become like the best they can be. So these are a few things that I sort of felt like it's important that we take as a lesson from what we've done, what we've sort of learned from the EMS. And the lack of trust that the EMS represent every mathematician is an important issue. I'm not sure how that can sort of be resolved, but I believe it starts again with each one of us, making sure that we question our way of operation to make sure that we are really, like, not just sort of paying lip service, but actually trying to sort of make the profession really inclusive. We need to learn from programs that has sort of been successful. I think back in December, the EMS and NAM co-organized a celebration of the 20 years anniversary of the graduation of Dr. Innes, Dr. Scott, and Dr. Wims from the University of Maryland. That was a very good program. How can we sort of make sure that this kind of programs sort of get highlighted? What can other departments learn from this program? So it's important to actually sort of not just sort of try to reinvent everything, but learn from what's already sort of in the book. The final thing I would like to say, and I'm not going to say much about it, is that the AMS missed a lot of opportunity to improve like inclusion in the profession. And one of the chapter, or part of one of the chapter, discuss exactly like the 1996 task force that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and which sort of had like some very good idea about like a graduate program. And I urge people to take a look if they want to sort of see a little bit more about what the task force actually proposed. And compared to what we were about to propose, you'll see like a similarity between our thought and what people have already sort of thought about. The final thing that I would like to talk about is that looking back and to piggyback on what Francis just said, there are people in the MS who have been sort of fighting the fight for a more inclusive profession for a long time. and those people were deemed like activists at some point. I don't think like many people in the AMS would have been happy to sort of let those people speak freely. I think of name like Lillard. I think of name like Jim Donaldson. I think there is of the Mathematical Action Committee. And so I'm hoping that people who are today sort of pushing for more inclusive society keep sort of pushing the society to sort of do better, because 25 years from now, we should look back and make sure that we're not sort of ashamed of the choices that we made, and that we could sort of stand and look back and sort of realize that we made the right choice. And through the work that we've done, there were instances where the AMS could have sort of make a big difference long time ago, but there was some hesitation that sort of follow, and things sort of didn't go as fast as they could have gone. So with that, I think I would like to stop here. I don't know, Francis, if you have anything to share.
I think that's a good place to open it up for a community discussion and Q&A.
I think you
very much. I'd like you both to, I'd like everyone to sort of give some kind of applause, either in the Zoom icon style or with your brick and mortar hands. Then I would like to add that I made a mistake earlier on in failing to mention that Kasso is currently serving as a vice president of the AMS, and that both Kasso and Francis are. Is that not true?
No, Francis is vice president. I'm a member of the council.
I got it backwards. I'm sorry. So
Kasso is on the executive committee,
and they're both also very active on the council. And I simply went to their bios on their web pages and failed to notice those things. And you can see I'm still getting it wrong. So I'm glad that I gave you. I'm glad that I stumbled in at least to the correct information. But now I'm going to turn to some questions in the Slido. And the first that I'm going to ask is from Piper H. And it is, did you keep track of how many people rejected interview requests?
Yes, we did.
Well, I don't have the number with me right now, but I think it's on the order of between 5 and 8. Is that about right?
Yes, about so. Yes, about so. I think we reached out to about 50 people directly, and no, 40 people, 45, and we spoke with about 30 of them.
My wife is in her department head is running a climate survey, and she was pushing for him to survey the faculty who had all left the department in the last 2 years, of whom there are like 7, and he declined to do so. So I thought that was a really good question.
And we totally respect those who declined to be interviewed and the many reasons that they had for doing so.
And asking that question first gives me the opportunity to combine 2 questions. So there's a question that's anonymous combined with a question from Justin, and that is the first one is, with missed opportunities and accountability in mind, does the AMS governance have a plan to publicly accept the findings and act on the report's recommendations? And I think that goes very well with what plans does the AMS have, or is it making to host or encourage events for the community to read, digest, and engage with the report?
So Francis, do you want to take it, or should I go first?
Yeah, feel free to chime in if I leave anything out. I mean, so I think right now, the council has, just like the public, well, they saw a draft version in January, and we had a preliminary discussion then on the first couple of chapters. And there's a plan now, currently, to have a discussion in the coming months after people have had a chance to read the report thoroughly. The council will engage in a discussion. You know, our hope, I think, is that at some point there will be some fuller accounting for past actions by the AMS. And that was part of the recommendation we made in recommendation number 10, the very last one. We do recognize that there are, you know, many moving pieces here. There are lots of things that some people will agree with and others won't among our recommendations, but that's the last one that's probably going to take some time for people to to digest before they can even think about how that would happen. You may recall that after shutdown STEM, that the AMS did issue a preliminary statement based on just a sampling of things that Jesse Cass compiled, and issued a sort of an apology, but it was kind of a apology looking forward to a greater accounting of what happened. And so that's where the task force was assembled. It was, I think, in early June 8th or so, that Jill Pfeiffer contacted both of us and asked us if we would co-chair this committee. And so it was looking forward to a fuller account. So many people felt like you can't apologize for what you don't really even understand. And so that was part of the reason we wrote this report, is to help people understand.
And if I can add something, I believe that we discussed a little bit about the report at the council meeting that this past weekend. And beside like trying to read and discuss this with the council, just like as a single item, not among like many agenda items, I think the staff at the MS, the Office of the Secretary, I believe are working to look at the recommendation and to put probably down like a plan to see which one can sort of be executed and which one, how, I mean, in what order they'll be executed. I also believe that one of the accountability one has probably been resolved. The new committee on diversity and equity and inclusion will start giving like a periodic update to the membership about like the implementation of the report. So that where things stand right now. So I believe like in the next couple of weeks, months, we'll probably know a little bit more about that.
And I think we do need to develop a plan. I mean, we're in some preliminary discussions about how to have extended conversations with the community. That possibly could happen through the new policy committee on equity, diversity, and inclusion. But we need to, I think, move through the council first and see what the reaction is there.
So I just want to sort of loop back to Justin's question, which was sort of less about what leadership was going to do sort of to change the sort of governance of the AMS or whatever, and more about how the AMS might lead some consciousness raising in the community.
I think it will be important to maybe discuss this like in open sort of, I don't know which format exactly, but we need to discuss this. Make sure people read the report, and if they have concern or if they have like any thought about the report, sort of make sure that they voice their concern or share what they think they would like to share. And what format that take, I'm not sure, but I believe like in the coming weeks, it seems like there'll be opportunity to have some sort of more discussion about what the report is saying, and try to go from there to sort of see like a fuller response. I think like, I'm not sure about like the technical term, but what we've done is we finished the report, and we just released the report to the MS, and I think as far as I know, there is no more action of that need to sort of be done officially, except for the MS to at some point announce like a plan for how to implement the report.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one way to think about this is the report is a report, and we just filed it with the council, and that happened officially through the council minutes, I think, of this meeting that happened this weekend. And so the question of what gets accepted by AMS is really a question in multiple pieces, right? Like if there's a recommendation that comes through. So for instance, one of the small sub bullets of our recommendations was to change the wording on that goes out with committee assignments that reflects a 1972 Equal Opportunity for Women statement to actually point to now a diversity, a broader diversity statement, so that every person who joins a committee will be pointed to a more fuller diversity statement than the one that was established in 1972. That's a small thing. That was something that seemed non-controversial that moved through the council and passed this past weekend. But we expect that there'll be some pieces that will be controversial. We can already see that having a vice president earmarked for various roles is something that's going to potentially take time to discuss and for people to come get on board with. And not everything, we don't believe everything will necessarily get implemented. We'll see how the council responds. So there's multiple pieces here, and the question of what's getting accepted is really a question in those pieces.
And to add something, it's also on the membership to sort of push for this, right? Because if the membership is really like pushing for some of these things to be implemented, I think we're going to see results. So if it's just left to the council or to the leadership, it's probably going to take time. But I believe like this is where like member weighing in on these various issues can sort of make a difference, which one sort of get executed and when.
Well, I'm glad that people raise these questions because you've clearly shown us that there's a lot of work to do to make sure that things happen. And so I'm worried, but I'm glad I know. So there is a question here that says most of the AMS's missed opportunities mentioned in the report are from the 50s to the 70s. Was there discussion of more recent ones by the task force?
There were some recent ones that we discussed. Yeah, I think the missed opportunities were 70s through the 90s mainly, and maybe aughts. So I'm not sure that, I think the blatant discrimination were 40s through the 70s. If I might just make a small point of correction. So yeah, I mean, I think basically reviewing council minutes was what we looked at to try to understand AMS actions.
So there's a question here that says, can we expand our notion of success of DEI efforts beyond the number of degrees conferred? How can math programs and mathematicians work for Black communities? Is that something that you thought about in your report, in your work?
Not in terms of a number, but in terms of for instance, the fact that we've been highlighting the role of the HBCU is somehow like maybe the broader profession is missing out on something about mentoring that it's worth maybe sort of trying to learn a little bit more about when we're trying to recruit more Black graduate students in our program. And that's something that we thought about a little bit. And I think Jim Lewis had sort of work on some of this issue in the past and pointed out exactly this fantastic mentoring program and how maybe this could sort of be something that the MS can sort of try to promote or to sort of make sure that we're learning. But I'm not sure we sort of specifically focus on exactly one way to actually sort of make sure that this get addressed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's a really interesting question. So how, given that NAM and somewhat the MAA have a better record on these issues, does the AMS plan to acknowledge their work with them, or learn from them?
We certainly hope so. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we mentioned in the report that AMS needs to build on work and acknowledge the work of others rather than just reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the surprising statistics that that came out that Edric Owens helped assemble together with AMS staff was, Kasso mentioned it. I think he mentioned 14 or 15 Black invited speakers at regional or national meetings, but the national meetings is just 2, right? Between 1967 and 2019, there's just 2 Black speakers in that whole period that were AMS invited speakers. And one of them was a joint a joint meeting with MAA. And one of the reasons that's surprising is, I think many of us can remember many speakers at JMM relatively recently, several speakers, maybe not abundance, and so you're like, wait a minute, those were all MAA speakers, if you think about it. And so with MAA withdrawing from JMM, I think that disparity is going to be even more evident unless AMS gets its stuff in gear.
So this is an interesting question. Did the organizers feel independent? This is from Dig and Carp. Given the history as documented in the report, is the AMS the right organization to critically examine the AMS?
I think we were pretty much sort of. I can say for sure that we were free to write what we wrote. There was no pressure. We look at this thing and then we put this report down, and we release it when we were ready to sort of show it to people. So I think we were quite independent, I'll say. Francis?
Mm-hmm. I think we've already heard from people who are upset that we released the report, and that somehow it hasn't yet been vetted and by the council or whatever. And so I think there is certainly a sense of independence that we felt that we had, that we could just release the report. It's our report. I mean, the council never decides to act on any of it. It still stands as a report from this committee that was commissioned by the president.
Mm-hmm.
And something to add to this is like, I think in 6 months, we just scratched the surface here. And if people want to sort of look more into this, I think we sort of probably indicate how you can do this. The AMS archive, the council minutes are online today, and most of them are online, and you can sort of go and then sort of, if you want to do more sort of digging and looking at more issue, I think there's a potential to sort of do that now.
I think a lot of people don't understand sort of how, the AMS is a large organization and how all the different pieces run. And I certainly didn't until I started getting involved in leadership. But, there's a staff who sort of do the day-to-day operations of the AMS. And then there's the elected leadership. And, by and large, the staff has been very cooperative in terms of requests. And they're generally, if you were privy to some of the conversations that we've had with people, historically speaking, the staff have always been generally very helpful in trying to do the will of the elected leadership. And so we've certainly only encountered very positive, helpful responses from staff in gathering our work. There wasn't like any resistance to hide anything. I do think that it is important to remember the AMS is really its members, right? Like, so the fact that we are critically examining AMS, I don't know that it could be critically examined even by people who are not. I mean, the AMS is a bunch of mathematicians. We're mathematicians. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question to ask if another body could have
I think a historian of science or something like that could certainly investigate something like this and take a fairly aggressive approach. An interesting question there is whether the AMS is an interesting enough organization to attract that kind of attention. But I don't know.
Harvey is an example of somebody who's doing that hard work. And one of the things that we thought about making it like a recommendation, but you saw it at the end of one of the chapters where we encouraged people to actually do more work and for AMS to digitize its records so that it become easier for more people to do some of that scholarship.
So we are now approaching 3:59, and so this may be a good moment for Justin or one of my more tech-savvy co-organizers to create breakout rooms, and then we'll head out to the breakout room. So could we just take the remaining few seconds that we're all together here and give Kasso and Francis another round of Zoom applause?